Welcome back to our podcast series on global capability centres, where we explore the pivotal role GCCs play in driving business success across borders. I'm Chris Danks, and today we are honoured to have Arvind Chaturvedi back with us again. Arvind is a senior leader with extensive experience across global organisations like CDK Global, AstraZeneca, Capita, and many others. Arvind has successfully transformed businesses and built high-performing teams across India, the US, the UK, Mexico, and many other parts of the world. Arvind is currently a board advisor for startup companies, offering his wealth of experience. You can connect with Arvind on LinkedIn. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the evolution of GCCs and how strong leadership can turn a GCC into a high-value asset for global organizations. We'll discuss the shift from cost center to value center, innovation, technology, talent management, and more. Arvind, thanks again for joining us here today.
Absolutely delighted to be back, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you again. So just to kick us off, Arvind, what does it mean to transform a GCC from a cost center into a value center?
Well, it's all of those things that you've already said in the intro, quite frankly, and it is about making that shift from being just a support organization to something that becomes a strategic asset for the whole organization. Delivering innovation, delivering real business value, customer satisfaction, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I think it's a complete shift in mindset in many respects of the organization, that's the parent organization, the GCC, its leadership and its teams, if you like, and really it is about redefining the purpose of what it stands for. I mean, where it might have started as a support, center, if you like, for certain services running, back office services running out of it. You got to start thinking about how do you make impact at the front end of the market, direct impact for the customer. How does the purpose of this organization align with the strategy of the parent organization or not, as the case might be, and how do you make it align if it is not already aligned with it? Because all of that becomes the first shift that you make. And then once you made that shift, obviously, everything changes with regard to how you treat your talent. What sort of talent you bring on board, how do you actually develop them, how aligned are they with the strategic opportunities that exist for the parent organization today and those that the organization might be wanting to avail in the future. Yeah. How do you actually get your talent there to be able to deliver to that future value that needs to be created? Even if you're thinking of operational efficiency, cost reduction, which is the typical metric that one associates with GCCs, right? You ought to be thinking of that beyond the normal, which is you got to be thinking of how it impacts the bottom line of the organization. What are you changing in terms of operational efficiency that can give operational efficiency and really impact the bottom line of the organization? Or what are you doing in terms of the cost? And how is that shift reflecting on the balance sheet, essentially, and the P&L of the organization? That's how you got to be thinking. And there are various other measures you got to add to how you traditionally measured yourself in that shift that you're making. You ought to be thinking of real, business indicators like customer satisfaction. I mentioned that earlier. What's the business growth that the GCC is contributing to directly or indirectly? That's something that we've got to look at. The operational agility that the GCC might be bringing or not at this point in time, but needs to bring in the future because things change so often and so swiftly these days with organizations and businesses across the world, essentially. How is it impacting the time to market? All those, various parameters that you would typically associate with the business, the hub locations of the business suddenly become very real for the GCC as well, and sometimes even more so than they might be applicable to the hub location. So I think shift in mindset, redefining the purpose, redefining how you measure yourself, redefining what talent means to you and how they need to be developed, thinking always in terms of what impact am I having on the business. That's the shift from being a cost center to a value center, according to me.
Arvind, just question around how things have evolved, let's say over the last 3 or 4 years. So in your view, how quickly have things developed, especially in India, for example, with organizations' approach to GCCs moving from a cost to a value center?
I think it's a shift that's happening as we speak. I mean, I cannot say that shift has happened, And it'll be probably a very long time before we can even make that statement, to be honest, because there are still for whatever good or bad reasons, the genesis of the GCC always lies in people's mind as a scaled team sitting in a low cost location, delivering the operations at a lower cost. Essentially, that's how they start with it, and unless the thinking at the point of inception changes, that shift will always be a secondary shift, which is what we're seeing most organizations go through. A large organization, many of them have actually made the shift. So don't get me wrong. If you talk of India, you mentioned India. India has got around 1,800 GCCs now. A large number of them coming from US and UK and Europe essentially, and some of them have been there for a long time and have matured into these value centers as we that we're talking about, quite frankly. But still there's a large proportion of them which still sit in that place where GCC is an outsourced organization. Essentially, it's an organization to which outsourcing is being done of some work that needs to be done, by a large volume of people at a low cost, essentially. Yeah. So I think the shift has definitely happened in the last 4 to 5 years, given the time frame that you talked about. Is it rampantly there for everyone to notice? Not quite, not as yet. Many of the larger organizations, more mature organizations with GCCs that have been there for a number of years now, have certainly got to that stage. But for me, the real shift will have happened, Chris, when people come in with that mindset, as opposed to changing it down the line after they've set it up as a support center in the first place, essentially.
Just thinking, I mean, skipping ahead a little bit here, but thinking future, if you look at places like, take Poland, for example, where Poland used to be very much a low cost, country, and that's really evolved now where the costs in Poland are comparable with that of the UK, for example. In my experience, we've seen a shift where, 10, 15, 20 years ago, people would move into Poland largely for cost reasons. And sometimes that perception there actually still exists from other parts of the world. But we have to educate a lot on actually that's not the reason why people are going there. But people are still going there. Organizations are still going there, but they're actually going there purely and utterly for the sheer quality and volume of the talent now, as opposed to a cost saving. Do you think, sort of looking much further forward, that's how it will evolve in places like India? Africa's maybe a little bit, a few steps behind when it comes to that evolution. Do you see it evolving in the same way in those parts of the
It
world?
will, and I think if you look at places like Bangalore in India, essentially which was, well, quite frankly, the Silicon City of India for all intents and purposes. Things have moved on. People do recognize that you got to go to India to find the right talent to do the right things for your business, essentially. And you find very good talent is a well-known fact. But I think like you said in the context of Poland as well, right? There is still that perception that if I go to Poland, I will get low cost, right? I think that has to go off completely for it to really become, a high value asset for any organization. You cannot look at wherever you're setting up a GCC, be it in India, be it in Poland, be it anywhere else in the world. Think of why you're creating this asset from the perspective of how it's going to enable your business in various aspects, from the customer satisfaction perspective, from the competitive advantage perspective, from just exploring new business opportunities perspective, entering into emerging markets, whatever that goal might be. But associate a goal with it which is beyond cost. The cost will come to the extent it can come in any case. I mean, it's a given. It's by default going to be a low cost location, right? As compared to the most developed countries that set up these GCCs in these low cost locations. But don't make that the primary objective. That's what I'm saying. And I think that shift is happening, but the shift is happening as a thought that comes after the GCC has been set up. For it to be really, really, pivotal in terms of, how it changes the whole GCC scenario, It has to be at inception. It has to be where it all starts in terms of thinking. The genesis of the thought of setting up a GCC should be because I want to enter an emerging market, or because I want to explore new business opportunities, or because I want to give myself a tremendous competitive advantage, or because I want to digitalize my entire business. And then it's a different ballgame altogether. It's my point, Chris.
Mm. Yeah, understood. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, there's a lot of organizations that, quite frankly, still move there initially for cost. That's what attracts them, right, in the first instance. And I'm thinking about some companies that we work with where they're even 6, 12, 18 months in, and in reality, their primary consideration is cost. However, they are, by sort of naturally learning that actually the greater benefit, almost just by doing, is around the talent availability, and you don't need to compromise on talent that maybe and communication and some of these other things that maybe were a thing in the past as well. Whereas now it's that the compromise isn't there. It's actually great to go there for the talent, and the cost is a byproduct. Although I do know, like I said, in reality, people still go there for cost and then find out that actually there's other reasons why people would go there. How do you think technology is adjusting some of the dynamics of GCC? So, for example, I was at a conference a few weeks ago, Transform, over in Las Vegas, and one of the technologies that was on one of the booths there was relating to AI interacting with voice to adjust accents from different parts of the world, to make the customer experience better. I found that really intriguing. I just thought it was a very intriguing prospect, and that was just one small example. But what's your take on technology and how that's kind of helping to evolve GCCs as well into a value center?
I think technology, the whole shift towards digital essentially across the globe, has really put a new life into the whole GCC phenomenon, if you like. Yeah. And there are multiple reasons for that. First of all, where these GCCs are typically located, those countries, those locations are really spending a lot of time and effort trying to make sure that the workforce that they are carrying within themselves have actually been equipped with the skills required to deal with this new digital world, essentially. So while the countries are still trying to sort of get there, these countries right from the outset are already preparing for that, if you like. If you just look at India, for instance, I mean, the number of engineers that come out every year, just the sheer volume of them, and all of them train in some of these great technologies that we're talking of these days, whether it's AI, ML, RPA, blockchain, you name it. They're all coming out with that, those fundamental skills built into them already, not having to learn them on the job. So they clearly come with that advantage and present that advantage to those locations in building GCCs. So GCCs are, certainly being impacted positively by this digital phenomenon, if you like, because they're becoming the hub of digitalization for their parent organization. It becomes easier for the parent organization to actually make that transformation, make that digital transformation happen, because they can do it from a central hub, which is already equipped to actually deliver that outcome, and slowly grow their digital maturity over time, essentially. So I think it really is adding a new dimension to the whole GCC phenomenon. This shift towards digital. The technology that you referred to from the Transform event that you were at, that comes from a very different angle. You can start questioning whether those limitations that might have existed in the past due to accents, etc., in terms of voice services running from remote locations, whether that is taken away by virtue of such technology coming into play, right? And that might further add to the scope of what people might be comfortable giving to GCs. There was this whole rush, which you might know of, Chris, I'm sure you do. Back in the early 2000s, lots of voice call centers set up across the globe in Southeast Asia, in India, etc., etc. And then slowly people realized that these outbound call centers were not quite working, because the native customer was not quite understanding what the agent was saying from wherever they were sitting. Essentially, the accents were a problem. Just the normal chit chat was a problem. I mean, somebody calling sitting in Chennai in India somebody in UK, and the UK customer probably wants to talk about the last evening's football match that happened over there, and this poor bloke doesn't have any clue as to what actually happened. So, even culturally, they're not connected, essentially. They can't have that small talk, that banter that actually makes call centers work. Yeah. So I think this contact center, call center is all, being opened up and then closed down because of these cultural differences and accent issues, etc. Of course, people will argue that there are voice and accent trainings and all that people do, but it's not quite the same. I mean, let me say this, as I see it, I've lived in the UK for 25 years, but I don't have an English accent. Simple as that. Okay, and my accent is my accent. Hopefully, it's legible for most part. I hope for that, and it seems to have worked. But there are different people with different accents. Simple as that. And if there's a technology that is going to allow you to actually change that accent and present it in a certain way, that's certainly going to help. There'll still be issues of the cultural nuances coming into play, essentially. Obviously, the football match example that I gave, for instance, technology cannot fix that. Those things will still exist, but it'll certainly bring a new, opportunity out there for people to explore if such technology is deployed. So I think twofold. One is how the technology enables the GCCs to increase their scope, your example of that technology that you saw at the Transform event. And then how does GCC actually enable the rest of the world to get digitalized, essentially? Yeah, the parent organization to get digitalized, which actually puts the GCC in a very good place on a pedestal that they never had earlier, essentially. So that's that way, in that manner, that digitalization is a great phenomenon that's happening, as a positive for the GCCs.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of examples of technology, and like you touched on the cultural side, and I think nowadays compared to the early 2000s, there's more acceptance of, if you're just talking about the voice side, when you pick up the phone or Teams call or whatever it might be these days, that, the chances are you're going to get someone in a different part of the world. So I think maybe even expectations have changed. But I do think that things like just the basic communication, other technologies that enable those kind of things, I think could have a major impact. And be interesting to see how it develops from a technology perspective, and maybe it'll accelerate the need for all the should we say the adoption of GCCs in different parts of the world if technology moves at that pace.
I certainly expect that, and I think GCCs will have a pivotal role in making the technology move that fast as well at that pace. Quite frank.
Yeah, of course, because a lot of the work developing the technology is in places like India and other parts of the world too. So yeah, absolutely, it's very interesting. So talk to us about metrics. So when you're moving from a cost center to a value center, how would you adjust your measures and metrics to really start measuring the right things?
So I think traditionally when people say metrics, they think quantitative indicators, right? It has to be a mix of quantitative and qualitative indicators for sure. At all times, whether it's a cost center or value center, I don't care how you look at your GCC. It has to be looked at from both those perspectives, quite frankly, and more so if you're making that shift or trying to make that shift to the value center, because standard measures like your cost optimization, efficiency gains, obviously productivity, turnaround time, cost of resource, economies of scale, all of those things are going to be there. But start thinking about what's the cost to revenue ratio. Because as a cost center, you wouldn't have thought about that. But when you become a value center, for this cost that I'm expending in my GCCs, what value am I actually generating out of it in true revenue terms? How's my P&L looking by virtue of that? That's something that you got to look at. So cost to revenue ratio becomes probably one added metric that you should start looking at, even if you're thinking just cost optimization and efficiency gain effectively. You got to look at real revenue growth. Is the GCC contributing to the business itself, either in terms of direct services that have been enabled by virtue of a GCC being there, and hence you have additional revenue opportunities, if you like, yeah? Or is it indirectly enabling revenue elsewhere? You got to identify that. You got to make sure that you're measuring that, just to make sure that you're associating the right value with the asset that you've got. Today's world, we talked about change that's happening all the time, right? And in that world, when you're trying to move your business on, you're trying to, go into new markets, etc. How does the GCC enable you to scale without, actually compromising on quality or productivity and such measures, if you like. Is it actually giving you the agility to scale as needed, when needed, as quickly as possible? Yeah. That's a great measure to look at as well when you think of a GCC as a value center. You got to start looking at how it's enabling the whole, innovation cycle of the organization. That's one big metric that I've always looked at very closely. What sort of innovation contribution does a GCC have? What is it bringing to the table? It could be process innovation, it could be product innovation, anything. Innovation of any kind that's going to make the business better. How is the GCC contribute? What is the level of contribution it has? How is it changing the innovation cycles as well? That's an important thing. How long does it take for you to get a new product idea out? That's an innovation cycle, right? So again, GCCs can really contribute to that, and you got to start sort of measuring the GCC on that. How is it actually contributing to enhancing the whole knowledge sharing across the organization? Skills development. We were just talking about, some of these countries having digital native workforce already existing, right? While the rest of the world, which has more the traditional workforce, needs to catch on and get there. How is this digital native workforce enabling the rest of the parent organization to actually get there? How they're creating that opportunity there. That's something that's worth measuring. Obviously, everything to do with the customer experience and service quality, and it has to be done on an even keel, quite frankly. I mean, as you would measure for a team sitting elsewhere, if there's if they have any customer touch point, if they have any, customer deliverables that they are responsible for, what is the quality of that? What is the experience of the customer on the back of it, essentially? That has to be measured. SLA adherence, you're talking of CSAT, you're talking of the NPS, all of those things have to be measured for sure. Yeah. One important thing I talked about when you asked me the question about how do you make that shift, how closely are your GCC's objectives, aligned with your strategic goals of the business, essentially. That has to be looked at very closely as well. And everything that the GCC is doing, is it actually having shared goals that enable the business to deliver the ultimate objective, the strategic objective, if you like. That has to be looked at as well. Yeah. And then we talked about the digitalization, right? Digital transformation. Talked about digital maturity. How is the GCC contributing to that? Because again, it's a digital native workforce that you've hired in this country, this place that you went to. How are they enabling the rest of the organization to get there? So various measures. You can think in terms of your compliance requirements. You can think in terms of your risk management requirements. All of those things become a possibility the moment you start looking at a GCC as a value center. Is there a GCC enabling you to actually, identify risks and draw out and deliver mitigation plans against those more proactively, essentially, because they're completely aligned with the strategic objective of the parent organization. There's no reason they shouldn't be able to, and they should be able to do it better because the GCC can generally have a broader vision across the organization. Imagine a parent organization which is spread across countries with business units aligned to regions of the world, essentially. A GCC sits like a horizontal organization underneath, looking at all these business units. So it has the visibility of the business, a broader visibility of the business, to be able to identify a forthcoming risk much more than any other unit of the organization, to be honest, right? I'm just giving that as an example. So I think there are various measures that you can add, which are completely business oriented, which is going to directly impact the measures that are going to directly impact the customer, the investor, the stakeholders of the business, if you like. The GCC can start contributing to that, essentially. So quite a collection of metrics that I've talked you through there, Chris.
No, great. No, good. I mean, one of the points I wanted to touch on, we've spoken a lot about leadership in previous, episodes, podcasts. But the specific question I have about leadership in the context of moving to a value center is, do we need different leaders, different types of leaders that manage, value center orientated GCCs versus more cost center focused GCCs? And if so, how?
I think the biggest difference, there are two differences that come to my mind immediately when you talk about how the leadership needs to look different, essentially. One is of course, a leadership that's leading a value center will make it their business to be aligned with the strategic objectives of the organization that they represent, okay, and constantly evaluate themselves on that as to how close they are, how well they understand the whole strategy, and then have the ability to set the vision and direction for the GCC to deliver to that, essentially. So that's a fundamental difference in the leader of a cost center with the leader of a value center. The alignment, the ability to actually get to that table where such things are discussed, the strategy of the business is discussed, be there at that table, understand what's being spoken about, what the plans are, what the strategy is, and then try and get the GCC team aligned behind that is a fundamental trait of a value center leader, if you like. Yeah, that's one very important aspect of it. And these leaders don't measure themselves on the basis of quantum of work delivered. That's the other fundamental difference. It's not about how much work did I deliver, how much effort did I expend. It is all about what outcome did I deliver, what value did I create. The value might be in terms of customer satisfaction. The value might be in terms of real revenue, or maybe in terms of profitability, whatever that is. But they are constantly looking at it from the value creation metrics as opposed to the work completion metrics, if you like. Yeah. So they and the third and most important thing, I suppose, is they have the ability to orient a whole team. These teams are usually large. GCCs have big teams, essentially. The ability of these leaders to actually get the whole team skilled, change in terms of the mindset, driven towards creating innovative ideas and solutions for the customers, for the business. That ability has to be, probably the most important one in my mind in leaders who are actually going to lead value centers. Because, when you're leading a cost center, it's the same old. You're following a process, you're delivering something, something comes through the input funnel, you do the process that you do, and then you throw something out at the back of it, essentially. And that's okay. That's just work management. Value center leaders are not work managers. They are well beyond that. They are actually people who are imaginative, who are creative, who can actually drive a team to a different level altogether and make sure that the mindsets are such that the asset is constantly creating new value for the business. I can go on about this, Chris. I have to be careful. I'm very passionate about this particular topic, actually.
Yeah, well, being a leader yourself, I should imagine so. I think it's a very valid point. I mean, we talked in previous episodes about making sure that the cultural fit is right as well between the leader in the GCC and wherever the headquarters, and how to sort of bridge that gap, have influence with the business leadership to put GCCs on the map and make them feel part of the organization. And I think there's, like we've talked about previously, there's so many kind of facets to just the leadership alone, right?
Yeah. And I think the leader plays a pivotal role in how the GCC is perceived by the rest of the business. They really are the face of the GCC, to be honest. And if they don't present a face which is assuring the business that this team, these people are actually all driven towards creating that business value, then the GCC will always be treated as a secondary organization, if you like, within that parent organization, and for no fault of anybody, quite frankly, apart from the leaders who represent it, essentially. So I think there's a huge responsibility that these leaders carry on their shoulders to actually make sure that they enable the business to leverage the GCC to in the best possible way by representing the GCC in the right manner. That's their presence at that table that you referred to there, Chris, essentially.
So talk us through maybe one success story from where we can sort of identify that a GCC has moved from a cost center into a value center. Have you got an example you can share?
Tons of them, actually, and I've been part of a few, quite frankly, where I'm very proud to say we made that shift, essentially, but without focusing entirely on what I did and make this my story. I'll give more examples from the wider world, essentially. But you name it, You look across the industries. If you look at manufacturing and the manufacturing industry, industrial units, et cetera. You look at companies like General Electric, GE. You look at companies like Siemens. They have used actually GCCs rampantly to change the way they interact with the customers essentially, and how they deliver to the customers. The whole incorporation of, if you look at GE in particular, they spent they put in a lot of focus in terms of focusing the GCCs on the entire IoT integration, Internet of Things integration, and building some digital solutions, etc. Giving them the ownership to build the whole solutions and bring them out to market as quickly as possible. Now, that's had a tremendous difference. I mean, I was reading a stat, and please don't hold me to it. This is not meant to be accurate at all, but I'm sure there's an accurate stat somewhere about that. But I was told by somebody, or I read it somewhere, I don't remember distinctly, that just by the effort of that, the IoT integration, etc., they have actually, changed the machine uptime and by 15%, which means a huge, gain for their clients essentially, right? So I think the ability to actually keep the work going, the machinery going, has actually improved the overall productivity, I'm sure, because the uptime has gone up by 15% essentially. And that's, just focusing the GCCs on one particular thing. And I'm talking of just one thing. They did various things with the GCC, turned them into innovation hub, for instance. If you look at energy companies, oil and gas companies like British Petroleum, Shell, they have used the GCCs very effectively to run their sustainability agenda, essentially. Huge thing for energy companies, right? Sustainable sources of energy, pulling down their own carbon footprint and also delivering what they need to deliver. They've used the GCCs for that, innovating on that essentially. And there's been some phenomenal reduction. People like Unilever have used, for digitalizing the whole supply chain. I mean, Unilever is the FMCG. It's a fast-moving consumer goods company, right? Supply chain is extremely important, as is for other industries as well. But for this particular industry, it is mega important. And you can't have stockouts, etc., happening. And using the GCCs to actually digitalize the whole supply chain, and then thereby being able to be predictive about what stocks they need and control the whole supply chain. They have really, really, made some major gains in terms of the product that they get out and the cost associated with it, essentially, quite frankly. So it is. I just talked about 4 or 5 just like that, but banking and financial services, HSBC, good old HSBC, has used GCCs actually to build in a lot of digital transformation and data analytics into their, and their focus was fraud prevention, essentially. And they have made some major gains on that, on fraud prevention. So as I was saying at the beginning, right, it doesn't matter what you focus the GCC on, as long as it's directly related to a gain for your business and gain for your customer, then you're turning it into a value asset. It could be one thing, it could be many things, and how thinly you want to spread them is up to you. Or you could just put the blinkers on them and say, hey, your job is this. You go and do this for me. Your job is to make sure that I get better at fraud prevention, HSBC style. Now you do what you got to do. The ownership is yours, right? And I think that changes the whole, perspective of the team that sits within the GCC. Firstly, they're so motivated, right? Because they're delivering directly to the business. Yeah, they can see tangible results coming out, business results coming out of what they do every day. So that's a huge motivation for any human being. You and I would like to do only those things where we can see tangible outcomes, right? It's true for every human being, essentially. So I think there are a number of examples. I can go on and on in terms of how things have changed by virtue of a GCC coming into play and becoming focused on creating certain value, either specific value or more broader value, if you like. But does that give you a flavor?
It does, yeah. It gives us a lot of examples, and I think there's what's really stood out for me as well is that volume of reasons that you can utilize a GCC. So, like you just mentioned there, one of the key things I just picked out from what you were saying is, it can be for one department, and like you said, HSBC style, fraud prevention, for example, or you can use it for a multitude of different different parts of the organization. And I'm guessing in some cases, in fact, if I think of some of our current customers, they've usually started for one core reason. And
Yeah,
then very, very quickly, because of the benefits we've discussed around cost, resource, talent, and so forth, it quickly scales. And that's, I guess, why we see many GCCs starting off as, you hear the plan of going to 20 or 30 people, and then before you know it, they're at 200 or 500 people, right?
exactly right. Exactly. And that's how it should go. But as long as it starts with one business objective, one strategic objective. I'm not good at this right now. I want to fix this. I'm going to do a GCC, find some good talent in that market and make them focus on this. And then it'll expand, like you said, organically. That's what he's saying. I mean, it's one thing leads to another, and you keep expanding that, right? And that's how it goes. So, but what it builds from inception, Chris, and I think that's where I would want organizations to make a note, quite frankly, if anybody's thinking about building a GCC, is what it creates is from inception a team that is completely focused on creating value. To transform it, not that you can't transform a team from which was, part of a cost center support unit, if you like, into a value creating team. But the inertia is huge, like with everything else. To break that inertia, change the momentum, and make it do anything different, turn direction, change direction, it's not easy. It's not easy. I would be, frankly, foolish to say that it can be done as easily as if you were to do it from inception. No, doing it from inception really, creates a mindset in the organization that then, is self-propagating and sort of keeps, getting better and better, if you like. Whereas if you went and hired leaders and team that was always focused on delivering low cost processes, essentially, that's what they're good at. You hired them for that. Now, don't expect them to suddenly wake up one morning and start doing anything different. And if you want to make them do anything different, then you'll have to invest heavily in that. You'll have to change their mindsets. You'll have to do leadership development. You'll have to do team development. You'll have to give them a different, focus to think about. And that doesn't happen easily. So, I like the idea of, what you said, 20 people GCC starting off on one particular business, area, focusing on one particular problem, and then expanding organically. That's far better than setting up a 200 people support center and then trying to convert it to a value center, essentially.
Right. Yeah, start as you mean to go on. Arvind, we're coming up to time now. So once again, I want to thank you for joining us here today and sharing your knowledge with us. The insights you're providing across this series are really insightful for me, and I'm sure for everybody listening and watching on the podcast. So really appreciate the insights you're sharing and the different angles that you're sharing across this series. Before we conclude this particular podcast, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and say, if you had to share just one piece of advice or one takeaway for our listeners here today, what would it be in relation to changing your GCC from a cost center to a value center?
Yeah, if it's the decision makers or the organizations who are listening to this, then think about what problem you're trying to solve for. Yeah, think about that. Yeah, and then decide where you want to go, how big a team you want to put out there, and what do you want to focus them on, essentially. All right. So start with the problem statement that you're trying to solve for, and hopefully a problem statement is not I want lower cost. That's what I hope for. If you are a leader of the GCC that's listening to this podcast, then think about how closely are you aligned to your business's objectives mentally. How your vision for your GCC, your unit, is aligned with the vision of the company that carries as a business, that it's trying to deliver to as a business, essentially. And if it is not, start correcting it right now. We talked about a few things that leaders need to do differently when they want to run a value center, when they want to be a leader of a value center. Start looking at how you're actually going to bring about those traits, essentially. That's my piece of advice. Chris, hopefully helpful.
Thank you, Arvind. No, that's great. Yeah, really good. Start with the problem statement. Makes a lot of sense. And I think, coming back to what we were saying earlier, I think the reality, at least from my slightly more limited experience than yours for sure, is that people do start with it's a cheaper location, but hopefully very quickly before they start moving further forward, it might attract them to the idea of a GCC. But hopefully, the next question will be, what's my problem statement? What am I really trying to achieve? And see the cost savings as a side effect rather than the core reason. So, and I think, as you say, that's what's starting to happen across the globe now for people to remain competitive. So yeah, it makes an awful lot of sense. So that's all we've got time for this episode. For those watching and listening, if you did enjoy the episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. You can also find Arvind's LinkedIn profile in the description if you'd like to connect and learn more about Arvind's journey and maybe hear one or two stories about the companies that Arvind directly has helped along that journey. So I also want to mention here for you today that don't know, if you're scaling up your organization, considering a GCC, or maybe you have a GCC in place and need additional support, we here at the Leadership Collective do specialize in helping organizations to identify locations, work through the problem statement that Arvind was talking about and how to solve that, right the way through to the talent acquisition and hiring of the talent that you need across those locations. So if that's something that is a need for you, please do get in touch with me directly or the team here at the Leadership Collective. Do follow us on LinkedIn as well, the Leadership Collective page on LinkedIn, to follow other content that we provide, not just within the podcast series, but outside of that as well on a number of other topics. So all that remains for me to say is thank you all very much for attending and spending the time here to learn about GCCs and how we are developing them from cost centers to value centers on a global basis now, and look forward to seeing you all on the next episode.